In the annals of military history, few weapons have earned the reverence and legendary status of the M1 Garand rifle. When General George S. Patton famously declared it the greatest battle implement ever devised, he wasn't merely offering hyperbole. He was acknowledging a technological revolution that fundamentally changed the nature of infantry warfare. The M1 Garand wasn't just another rifle. It was the world's first standard-issue semi-automatic military rifle, giving American soldiers a decisive advantage on every battlefield of World War II. While enemy forces struggled with bolt-action rifles that required manual cycling after each shot, American GIs could fire 8 rounds as fast as they could pull the trigger. This seemingly simple innovation translated into superior firepower, faster engagement times, and ultimately saved countless American lives. The distinctive ping of its ejecting en-bloc clip became one of the most recognizable sounds of the war, a metallic declaration of American industrial might and military superiority. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of Guadalcanal, from the frozen hills of Korea to the rice paddies of Vietnam, the M1 Garand served with distinction for nearly 3 decades, earning its place not just in military arsenals, but in the hearts of the men who carried it into battle. The story of the M1 Garand begins not on a battlefield, but in the workshop of a brilliant Canadian-American firearms designer named John Cantius Garand. Born in Quebec in 1888, Garand emigrated to the United States as a child and grew up during the dawn of the Industrial Age. His fascination with machinery and firearms led him to the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts in 1919, where he would spend the next 34 years perfecting his craft. Garand was a meticulous perfectionist, a man who understood that in the heat of battle, reliability meant the difference between life and death. Working in an era when most military planners still favored bolt-action rifles, Garand envisioned something revolutionary, a self-loading rifle that could give individual soldiers the firepower of a small squad. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, he tirelessly refined his designs, testing countless prototypes and overcoming numerous technical challenges. His persistence paid off in 1936 when the U.S. Army officially adopted his design as the M1 rifle, making it the standard infantry weapon of the American military. Remarkably, despite creating one of the most influential weapons in military history, Garand never became wealthy from his invention. He had developed the rifle as a government employee and received no royalties. Yet his legacy would be measured not in dollars, but in the lives saved and victories. At the heart of the M1 Garand's revolutionary design was its gas-operated rotating bolt mechanism, a masterpiece of engineering that balanced power, reliability, and simplicity. Unlike bolt-action rifles that required the shooter to manually chamber each round, the Garand harnessed the explosive gases generated by firing a cartridge to automatically cycle the action. Here's how this ingenious system worked. When a round was fired, some of the propellant gases were diverted through a small port in the barrel into a gas cylinder located beneath the barrel. These gases drove a piston backward, which in turn rotated and unlocked the bolt, extracted the spent cartridge casing, cocked the hammer, and chambered a fresh round, all in a fraction of a second. This self-loading mechanism allowed soldiers to maintain their sight picture and firing position while engaging targets, dramatically increasing accuracy and rate of fire. The rifle fed from an 8-round en bloc clip that was inserted from the top of the receiver, and when the last round was fired, the clip was automatically ejected with that distinctive ping sound. The entire system was designed to function reliably in the harshest conditions imaginable, from the sub-zero temperatures of the Ardennes to the tropical humidity of the Pacific Islands, from the choking dust of North Africa to the mud of Northern Europe. This remarkable reliability wasn't accidental. It was the result of Garand's obsessive attention to detail and years of rigorous testing and refinement. The M1 Garand was chambered for the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, a powerful round that had proven itself in World War I and would continue to serve American forces for decades. The designation .30-06 refers to its .30 caliber bullet diameter and its adoption year of 1906. This cartridge was a perfect match for the Garand's capabilities. It offered excellent range, penetration, and stopping power while remaining controllable in a semi-automatic platform. The standard M2 ball ammunition used in the Garand fired a 150-grain bullet at approximately 2,800 feet per second, delivering devastating effect at ranges up to 500 yards and beyond. This gave American infantry a significant advantage in engagement range over enemies armed with intermediate cartridges or pistol-caliber submachine guns. The .30-06 could penetrate light cover, punch through helmets, and remained lethal at distances where many enemy weapons were merely harassing fire. However, this power came with trade-offs. The recoil of the cartridge was substantial, and the rifle itself weighed 9.5 pounds unloaded, considerably heavier than many contemporary weapons. Yet, soldiers who carried the Garand rarely complained about its weight. They knew that heft contributed to controllability, and that the rifle's power and reliability more than compensated for any burden. The combination of the M1 Garand and the .30-06 Springfield cartridge created a weapons system that remained militarily relevant for nearly 50 years, serving not just in World War II, but also in Korea, the early years of Vietnam, and in reserve and training roles well into the 1970s. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, the nation faced a monumental challenge: equipping millions of soldiers with the M1 Garand in the shortest possible time. This demand sparked one of the greatest industrial mobilizations in history, as American manufacturing prowess transformed to meet the needs of global warfare. Springfield Armory, where Garand had developed his rifle, was the primary production facility. But it quickly became clear that one armory could never produce enough rifles to meet wartime demands. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company was brought in as a second manufacturer, and later International Harvester and Harrington and Richardson also began production. These factories operated around the clock, with workers, many of them women who had taken the places of men gone to war, manning the production lines in shifts that never stopped. The manufacturing process was incredibly complex, with each rifle containing dozens of precisely machined parts that had to work together flawlessly. Quality control was paramount. Every rifle underwent rigorous testing before it could be approved for military service. At peak production, these factories were producing thousands of M1 Garands every single day. By the war's end, approximately 4 million M1 Garand rifles had been manufactured, and production continued into the 1950s, eventually totaling over 5.4 million units. This massive production effort represented not just industrial capacity, but American determination, the arsenal of democracy working at full capacity to arm the forces of freedom. Receiving an M1 Garand was just the beginning of a soldier's relationship with the weapon, Mastery required extensive training and practice. In training camps across America, raw recruits were transformed into proficient marksmen through intensive rifle instruction that emphasized the fundamentals: breathing, trigger control, sight picture, and follow-through. Drill instructors preached the gospel of rifle maintenance, drumming into their charges that the Garand was their best friend in combat, and like any friend, it required care and attention. Soldiers learned to field strip the rifle blindfolded, to clear malfunctions instinctively, and to function check every component. They spent hours on rifle ranges, first learning to engage stationary targets at known distances, then progressing to more challenging scenarios with moving targets, time pressure, and stress. The Army's marksmanship training emphasized accuracy over volume of fire. Even though the Garand could fire rapidly, soldiers were taught to make every shot count. Beyond individual marksmanship, training also covered tactical employment: how to use the Garand's firepower to support squad movements, how to estimate range without optical aids, when to fire and when to hold fire. Veterans often recalled that they fired thousands of rounds in training before ever seeing combat, developing the muscle memory and confidence that would prove crucial in battle. This investment in training paid enormous dividends. American riflemen consistently demonstrated superior marksmanship compared to their adversaries, and the combination of skilled shooters and superior weapons created a formidable force on any battlefield. The M1 Garand received its baptism of fire in the Pacific Theater, where American forces island-hopped their way toward Japan through some of the most brutal combat of World War II. In the jungles of Guadalcanal, the dense forests of New Guinea, and the volcanic caves of Iwo Jima, the Garand proved its worth under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Japanese forces, armed primarily with the bolt-action Arisaka Type 99 rifle, found themselves at a severe disadvantage in the close-quarters jungle fighting, where the Garand's rapid fire was devastating. When Japanese soldiers launched their terrifying banzai charges, mass infantry assaults designed to overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers and aggression, American riflemen with M1 Garands could deliver aimed fire twice as fast as their bolt-action counterparts, often breaking these charges before they reached American lines. The rifle's reliability in the humid, corrosive environment of the Pacific Theater was remarkable. Even when caked with mud, sand, or coral dust, properly maintained Garands continued to function. Marines and soldiers learned to protect their weapons from the elements using improvised covers and religiously cleaning them during rare moments of respite. The Garand's power also proved crucial in penetrating the palm logs and earth that protected Japanese bunkers and pillboxes. Stories circulated of soldiers using their Garands to shoot through coconut trees to hit enemies taking cover behind them. Perhaps most importantly, the confidence that came from carrying a Garand, knowing you had firepower superiority over the enemy, provided an invaluable psychological advantage in the terrifying crucible of Pacific combat. On June 6, 1944, when Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history, thousands of M1 Garands came ashore with them. On Omaha Beach, where American troops faced murderous fire from German defenders positioned in fortified positions overlooking the beach, the Garand allowed soldiers to return fire effectively even under the most harrowing conditions. As the campaign moved inland through the hedgerows of Normandy, the Garand's firepower proved decisive in the close-range battles that characterized bocage fighting. German forces, equipped primarily with the excellent but bolt-action Mauser Kar-98K rifle and supported by machine guns, respected the American rifleman's ability to lay down rapid and accurate fire. During the brutal winter fighting in the Battle of the Bulge, where German forces launched their last major offensive in the West, M1 Garands continued to function reliably even in sub-zero temperatures that caused other weapons to malfunction. American infantrymen, outnumbered and surrounded in places like Bastogne, depended on their Garands to hold off German attacks until relief arrived. As Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, the Garand remained the infantryman's constant companion through the rubble of bombed cities and across the Rhine River. Unlike the German STG-44, the world's first assault rifle, which appeared late in the war, the M1 Garand had been in American hands from the beginning, giving U.S. forces a sustained advantage throughout the entire conflict. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the M1 Garand had proven itself across every type of terrain and in every kind of combat that Europe could offer. Few sounds in military history have become as iconic as the metallic ping of an M1 Garand's en-bloc clip ejecting after the 8th round was fired. This distinctive sound occurred when the bolt locked back after the last shot, automatically ejecting the empty clip from the top of the receiver. For American soldiers, this sound was simply a signal to reload, a process that became second nature through countless hours of training. They would produce a fresh clip from their ammunition belt, insert it into the receiver with the bolt held back, and be ready to fire again in seconds. However, wartime lore holds that enemy soldiers learned to recognize this sound and would attempt to rush American positions immediately after hearing it, knowing the riflemen needed a moment to reload. While this story has been repeated countless times, historical evidence suggests it was more myth than reality. In the chaos of actual combat, with explosions, machine gun fire, artillery, and the general cacophony of battle, hearing one specific rifle ejecting its clip among hundreds or thousands of other weapons firing simultaneously was virtually impossible. Furthermore, American infantry doctrine emphasized coordinated fire within squads, meaning that while one soldier was reloading, others were providing covering fire. Nevertheless, the story persisted, and some soldiers developed tactics to counter this supposed vulnerability, including carrying an empty clip to throw on the ground as a decoy, or immediately getting a fresh clip ready before firing their last round. True or not, the Garand ping has transcended its practical origins to become a cultural touchstone, instantly recognizable to military historians, veterans, and history enthusiasts worldwide. While the standard M1 Garand served admirably in its infantry role, the U.S. military developed several specialized variants to meet specific operational needs. The most famous of these was the M1C and M1D sniper variants, which featured scope mounts and specialized optics that transformed the already accurate Garand into a precision instrument capable of engaging targets at extended ranges exceeding 600 yards. These sniper variants saw extensive use in World War II and Korea, with trained marksmen using them to eliminate enemy officers, machine gun crews, and other high-value targets from distances exceeding 600 yards. The M1C featured a side-mounted scope that allowed the rifle to still be loaded with standard 8-round clips, while the M1D used a similar mounting system with a slightly different scope configuration. Beyond official military variants, soldiers in the field often customize their Garands to suit individual preferences or specific mission requirements. Some units, particularly in the Pacific, modified their rifles with shorter barrels for easier handling in dense jungle, though these unofficial modifications were generally discouraged. The rifle also served as the basis for the M14 rifle, which would eventually replace the Garand in the late 1950s and early 1960s. The M14 retained the Garand's basic operating system, but featured a detachable box magazine, select fire capability, and was chambered for the newer 7.62 by 51 mm NATO cartridge. Various civilian sporting and target shooting variants were also developed, and the Garand found a second life in competitive shooting circles, where its accuracy and reliability made it a favorite for matches governed by the civilian marksmanship program. The M1 Garand's legendary reliability didn't happen by accident. It required diligent maintenance and proper care, lessons that were drilled into every soldier who carried one. The rifle could tolerate incredible abuse and continue functioning, but it performed best when soldiers followed proper maintenance procedures. Field stripping the Garand was a ritual every GI learned by heart. First, ensure the rifle is unloaded. Pull back the operating rod handle and lock the bolt to the rear. Remove the trigger housing group. Pull back the operating rod until it can be lifted off the rifle. Then separate the bolt from the operating rod and remove it from the receiver. This process allowed soldiers to access the critical components that required regular cleaning and lubrication. In combat conditions, soldiers cleaned their rifles whenever possible, scrubbing carbon buildup from the gas cylinder, wiping down the bolt and operating rod, and applying a light coat of oil to prevent rust and ensure smooth operation. The rifle's wood stock also required attention. Soldiers learned to treat the wood to protect it from moisture and to check regularly for cracks that might affect accuracy. One of the M1 Garand's most maintenance-intensive components was the gas system. The small gas port that tapped propellant gases to cycle the action could become fouled with carbon deposits, reducing the rifle's reliability. Experienced soldiers learned to recognize the symptoms of a partially blocked gas port, failure to fully cycle, ejecting empty cases weakly, or failure to lock the bolt back on the last shot, and knew how to clean it properly. This maintenance discipline, combined with the rifle's robust engineering, kept Garands running through years of hard service under the most demanding conditions imaginable. To truly appreciate the M1 Garand's impact, it's essential to compare it with the weapons carried by enemy forces during World War II. German infantry primarily used the Mauser Kar-98K, a bolt-action rifle that traced its lineage back to the 1890s. While the Kar-98K was an excellent weapon, accurate, reliable, and powerful, it required the shooter to manually operate the bolt after each shot, limiting its rate of fire to perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute. In contrast, a trained soldier with an M1 Garand could fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute, giving him roughly triple the firepower. Japanese forces relied on the Arisaka Type 99, another fine bolt-action rifle, but one that fired a less powerful cartridge than either the American 30-06 or German 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser. British and Commonwealth forces carried the Lee Enfield, which had the advantage of a 10-round magazine capacity but was still a bolt-action design. The Soviet Union fielded the Mosin Nagant, a rugged and reliable bolt-action rifle, alongside smaller numbers of the SVT-40 semi-automatic rifle, which was comparable to the Garand in concept but proved less reliable in field conditions. Late in the war, Germany introduced the STG-44, generally considered the world's first true assault rifle, which featured select fire capability and an intermediate cartridge. However, the STG-44 appeared too late and in too small numbers to significantly affect the war's outcome. Throughout the conflict, the M1 Garand's combination of semi-automatic fire, powerful cartridge, and consistent reliability gave American infantrymen a distinct advantage in firefights. This superiority in individual weapons helped offset areas where Axis powers had advantages, such as Germany's superior machine guns and artillery. When North Korean forces invaded South Korea in June 1950, the M1 Garand once again proved its worth in combat, this time in the frozen mountains and rugged terrain of the Korean peninsula. The Korean War presented challenges different from World War II. The extreme cold of Korean winters tested equipment to its limits, with temperatures regularly plunging well below zero. Yet the Garand continued to perform reliably, even in conditions that caused many other weapons to fail. The harrowing fighting retreat from the Chosin Reservoir in late 1950, when UN forces fought their way through overwhelming Chinese opposition in brutal winter conditions, the M1 Garand functioned when properly maintained, while many lighter, more complex weapons froze solid. Chinese and North Korean forces, armed primarily with Soviet-supplied bolt-action rifles and submachine guns, found themselves outmatched in medium-range engagements where the Garand excelled. The rifle's power and range proved particularly valuable in the mountainous terrain that characterized much of the Korean fighting, where engagement distances often exceeded those typical of World War II's European theater. American soldiers discovered that their Garands could effectively engage enemy positions on opposite hillsides at ranges where enemy rifles were far less effective. The static nature of the war after the first year, with both sides dug into fortified positions, also favored the Garand's accuracy and range. However, Korea also highlighted some limitations that would influence future weapons development. In close-quarters trench fighting, the Garand's length and 8-round capacity sometimes proved disadvantageous compared to submachine guns and newer assault rifles, lessons that would inform the development of the M114 and eventually the M116. The M1 Garand was extensively used by America's allies during and after World War II. Through the Lend-Lease program during the war, thousands of Garands were provided to Free French forces who used them to help liberate their homeland. After the war, as the United States sought to strengthen its allies during the Cold War, Garands were provided to dozens of nations through military assistance programs. South Korea received substantial numbers of M1 Garands, which armed their military through the Korean War and for years afterward. The Philippines, Taiwan, Japan's post-war self-defense forces, and numerous South American nations all received Garands as part of American military aid packages. European NATO allies, including Italy, Greece, and Denmark, used Garands to equip portions of their armed forces during the 1950s. Perhaps most notably, the Garand remained in service with some National Guards and reserve units in various countries well into the 1970s and even 1980s. Each nation that used the rifle developed its own maintenance procedures, training programs, and tactical doctrine around the weapon. Some countries, particularly Italy, even manufactured their own versions under license, producing the BM-59 series that modernized the Garand design with detachable magazines and other improvements. This international service demonstrated that the Garand's appeal wasn't merely American pride. It was genuinely recognized worldwide as an outstanding military rifle that gave any force lucky enough to be armed with it a significant advantage over adversaries carrying older bolt-action weapons. The M1 Garand has been carried into battle by countless soldiers, including many who would later become famous. Audie Murphy, the most decorated American soldier of World War II, carried a Garand during many of his most heroic actions, including the famous stand where he single-handedly held off German forces while calling in artillery fire. Future presidents served as riflemen armed with Garands. George H.W. Bush flew combat missions as a naval aviator, but infantry training familiarized him with the rifle, while countless other political and military leaders of the post-war generation learned marksmanship on the weapon. Beyond famous names, countless ordinary soldiers developed deep personal connections with their Garands. Veterans' memoirs are filled with stories of rifles that never failed them, that saved their lives in desperate moments, that became so familiar that the soldier could recognize his own rifle by touch in complete darkness. Some soldiers named their rifles, writing names like Betsy or Sweet Pea on the stock. They spoke of their Garands as trusted companions, and many veterans, decades after the war, would tear up when handling an M1 Garand again, the weight and feel bringing back floods of memories, both terrible and proud, from their service. One particularly poignant aspect of Garand ownership is the serial number. Many veterans remembered the serial number of their issue rifle for the rest of their lives, and in some cases, families have successfully tracked down the actual rifle their father or grandfather carried in combat, reuniting the veteran with his old friend, or, if he had passed, allowing his descendants to hold the very weapon that protected his ancestor during the defining experience of his life. When World War II and Korea ended, hundreds of thousands of M1 Garands returned home, and many found new lives as civilian sporting rifles. Beginning in the 1950s, the Civilian Marksmanship Program, established by the U.S. government to promote firearms safety and marksmanship, began selling surplus Garands to qualified American citizens. These rifles found enthusiastic owners among veterans who had carried them in service and wanted to own one again, as well as target shooters who appreciated the rifle's inherent accuracy. The Garand became a fixture at national match competitions at Camp Perry, Ohio, where the best shooters with the most accurate rifles compete annually. Gunsmiths specializing in accurizing Garands developed techniques to enhance the rifle's already impressive precision. Tuning triggers, bedding actions, and carefully selecting ammunition to produce rifles capable of minute-of-angle accuracy, meaning they could place shots within a 1-inch circle at 100 yards. Hunters also discovered that the Garand, while heavier than most sporting rifles, was an excellent big game rifle for deer, elk, and even larger animals, with the .30-06 cartridge providing more than adequate power for any North American game. Collecting Garands became a serious hobby, with enthusiasts seeking rifles from specific manufacturers, production dates, or with particular features. Original World War II and Korean War-era Garands in excellent condition became valuable collector's items, with some rare variants commanding prices in the thousands of dollars. Even today, more than 80 years after its adoption, the Garand remains popular with shooters, and the CMP continues to sell refurbished Garands to qualified purchasers, though availability has become increasingly limited as the supply of surplus rifles dwindles. The M1 Garand has transcended its utilitarian origins to become an icon of American military heritage and popular culture. Its distinctive silhouette is instantly recognizable to anyone with even a passing interest in World War II history. The rifle appears prominently in countless war films, from classics like Saving Ryan's Private and Band of Brothers to documentaries and historical dramas spanning decades of filmmaking. Video games set in World War II almost invariably feature the M1 Garand as a primary weapon, and game designers meticulously recreate its distinctive characteristics, including that famous ping sound. The rifle has been commemorated on postage stamps, featured in museum exhibits worldwide, and appears as a symbol of the greatest generation's sacrifice and valor. Beyond entertainment and commemoration, the Garand influenced firearms design for decades. Its gas-operated system became the basis for numerous subsequent military and civilian rifles. The M14, M1A, and various other rifles can trace their mechanical lineage directly to Garand's original design. Even modern semi-automatic rifles, though often very different in appearance and operation, owe a debt to the principles Garand established. The rifle has also become a bridge between generations. Many gun owners and history enthusiasts have purchased Garands to connect with family members who served, to understand what their grandfather carried, to physically hold a piece of history. For veterans, the Garand often represents the weapon that saw them through the most intense experience of their lives, a tangible link to their youth, their service, and their fallen comrades. This emotional resonance has ensured that even as the rifle fades from active military service, it remains deeply embedded in American military culture and historical consciousness. Despite its legendary status, the M1 Garand wasn't without technical challenges, and understanding how designers and soldiers overcame these issues reveals much about both the weapon and the men who used it. One early concern was the en-bloc clip system. Critics argued that having the clip eject automatically could present tactical disadvantages, and that a detachable box magazine would be more practical. However, the en-bloc system proved remarkably reliable, and the topping-off issue, or inability to add rounds to a partially loaded rifle without ejecting the remaining rounds, was rarely problematic in actual combat. Another challenge was the rifle's sensitivity to ammunition pressure. The gas system was precisely tuned for standard pressure military ammunition, and using overpressure rounds could damage the operating rod, while underpowered ammunition might cause failures to cycle. Armorers developed detailed inspection procedures to catch bent operating rods before they caused malfunctions. The Garand's weight, while contributing to controllability, made it heavier than many soldiers would have preferred, particularly in long marches or jungle fighting. However, attempts to significantly reduce weight compromised reliability or durability, so the rifle's mass remained largely unchanged. Perhaps the most significant technical limitation was the 8-round capacity, which was lower than many soldiers would have liked. This limitation influenced the development of the M14, which used a 20-round detachable magazine. The rifle also required careful maintenance of the gas system to prevent carbon buildup from affecting reliability. Yet despite these challenges, or perhaps because they were addressed so effectively, the Garand earned a reputation for exceptional reliability that few weapons before or since have matched. By the late 1950s, despite the M1 Garand's stellar service record, military planners recognized the need for a more modern infantry rifle. The experiences of World War II and Korea, combined with observations of Soviet development of intermediate cartridges and assault rifles, convinced the U.S. military that the future of infantry weapons lay in select-fire rifles with detachable magazines. This realization led to the development of the M14 rifle, which began replacing the Garand in frontline service in 1959. The M14 retained much of the Garand's basic operating system, the gas-operated rotating bolt mechanism that had proven so reliable, but modernized the platform with a 20-round detachable box magazine, select fire capability, allowing both semi-automatic and full automatic fire, and was chambered for the new 7.62 by 51 mm NATO cartridge, which was essentially a shortened version of the 30-06. The transition from Garand to M14 wasn't instantaneous. It took several years for sufficient M14s to be manufactured and distributed throughout the military. During this transition period, both rifles served side by side, and many Reserve and National Guard units continued using Garands well into the 1960s. Some Garands even saw limited service in Vietnam during the early years of American involvement, particularly with South Vietnamese forces and some American advisory units. However, the M14's own service life as the standard U.S. infantry rifle would be relatively brief. The rifle's .30 caliber power proved excessive for full automatic fire, making it difficult to control, and the lengthy engagement distances it was designed for rarely occurred in Vietnam's jungles. By the mid-1960s, the M14 was already being replaced by the M16, a lightweight rifle firing a smaller intermediate cartridge that represented a completely different philosophy of infantry weapons design. Yet the M14's short service life shouldn't diminish the Garand's legacy. The M1 had served as America's primary infantry rifle for over 2 decades, a remarkably long service life that speaks to the excellence of its original design. As we reflect on the M1 Garand's place in military history, General Patton's famous assessment rings truer with each passing year. The rifle didn't merely serve during World War II. It fundamentally shaped the outcome of that conflict by giving American infantry a decisive tactical advantage in every theater of war. The simple fact that an American soldier could fire 8 aimed shots in the time it took his enemy to fire 3 or 4 with a bolt-action rifle created a multiplying effect across every engagement, every battle, every campaign. This firepower advantage, combined with American industrial capacity, training, and determination, helped turn the tide against Axis forces that often had superior tactics, better positioned defenses, or greater battlefield experience. The Garand's reliability meant that soldiers could trust their weapons absolutely, allowing them to focus on tactics and survival, rather than worrying about malfunctions at critical moments. Its accuracy gave individual riflemen the ability to engage targets at ranges where they could make a real difference in combat. Its durability meant it could survive the abuse of amphibious assaults, jungle warfare, winter campaigns, and desert fighting without failing. Beyond its mechanical excellence, the M1 Garand represented something larger: American ingenuity, industrial might, and commitment to equipping soldiers with the best possible tools. John C. Garand's masterpiece served for nearly 3 decades, through 2 major wars and countless smaller conflicts, protecting American soldiers and advancing American interests around the world. Today, more than 80 years after its adoption, the Garand remains revered by collectors, shooters, veterans, and historians. It stands as a testament to what can be achieved when brilliant engineering meets skilled manufacturing and brave soldiers. The M1 Garand truly earned its place as the greatest battle implement ever devised, and its legacy endures not just in museums and collections, but in the very foundations of modern military rifle design. It was, without exaggeration, the rifle that won the war and changed military history forever.